So hi everyone. Thanks for having me here. So I'll really try to fit in the proposed timing in the 40 minutes, which we have. So like I'll ask you to uh, I'll take just very short follow-up questions, and more general questions kind of will be at the end in my presentation. So I will discuss several puzzles in Shughni negation. Some of them have been like explored by earlier scholars, and for some of them, I'm maybe the first one studying here. So the brief overview of the topics covered today is like that. We will examine the clitic path on indefinite pronouns under the scope of negation. We will discuss the interaction between negation and modals in a very broad context. And we will also discuss non-finite negative marker no and its context. The honorary mentions constituent negation 9 and the negative copulinist, but I will not immediately go to them. So let's start with the clitic path. There is this clitic which almost obligatorily appears on indefinite pronouns in the scope of sentential negation. That has not always been the case, but like I think that in contemporary Shughni, spoken in Harok, it is like that. So it is better to say yichayat nayat, nobody came, than to say yichai nayat. And these contexts of ath on indefinite pronouns in the scope of sentential negation is the main focus of my first investigation. But before discussing them, let's take a brief detour and let's discuss other contexts of ath. Apart from appearing on indefinite pronouns, this clitic surfaces in different contexts. So it appears on noun phrases in emphatic contexts. It appears on adverbs, and it also appears on the universal quantifier fuk and on the numeral you in substantive contexts. In the first two contexts, ath has almost no connection to negation, and it might be omitted. So it's not something that you would call obligatory. So let's dive deeper into the examples. So it's даже назаршоят наят, even назаршо did not come, right? This ath may surface in non-negative context when appearing on NPs. Taram yichurikat dundvud. There was only one man. We do not see overt negation in the example 3, but still we get the ath. Still, there are some negative nominal contexts where ath is obligatory, right? It is not always the case that we may omit it. So, for example, it surfaces in the NPI proverbs like the four. Wind we darakat nist. So, wind we darak nist is ungrammatical, as argued by my respondents. So there has been a study by Fanny Daniel from which surveys the context of ath appearing on adverbs. And in this context, it gives rise to subtle semantic contrasts. Sometimes there is no contrast between the adverb with na and without na, with adverb with ath and without ath. Sometimes there is a contrast, as you can see here. So, ku aznau takrorke, repeat it, please, and ku aznauat takrorke. And in the first example, it might mean just repeat a word, something like that. And in the second example, in the sixth example, it rather means repeat the whole sentence. So we get some meaning of emphasis. As seen from the previous contrast, the presence of the clitic adds a certain emphasis to the adverbial constituent. So on the basis of this context, nominal ath and adverbial ath, it may be argued that this clitic is a kind of a focus marker. I'll phrase it very vaguely here: emphasis marker, focus marker, and this claim would be essential to the second part of my talk. It is about ath on indefinite pronouns. Oh, also, which I forgot to include here is the etymology of ath, which according to the etymological dictionary of Iranian languages by Joyce von Edelman, that means something like so or also so. Yeah. So, okay. So let's get to the main point of the first puzzle. The ath on indefinite pronouns and C means negative concord. There's a strong informal intuition which that ath on the pronouns of ye series is somehow linked to negation, right? It has been mentioned like the link between negation and ath on the has been mentioned by like literally every scholar who has touched on that matter, like Karamshoyev, Alamshoyev, a recent dissertation by Clinton Parker. But what is the exact nature of this connection? So, like, is it more similar to a vocabulary item like English anything or to Russian word nikto? And in order to test this, I have used tests from Watanabe, from influential paper by Watanabe. And these tests distinguish between negative concord and negative polarity items. So like Russian nikto is an NCI negative concord item, and English anything is negative polarity. A Russian example of negative polarity item is кто-либо. So let's look at the test. So its appearance in elliptic answers, not being found in non-negative contexts, its appearance with almost, appearance in the subject position, and being strictly bounded by a clause, right? I have already thought about it in 2019, and now I have a bigger and fuller picture about it. So the first criterion shows that it is an NCI, right? So we do not expect negative polarity items to surface in elliptic contexts. Meanwhile, for the NCIs, for the negative concord items, it's perfectly okay. To Chiswood, Yichizat, right? What did you bring? Nothing. And here, Earth is obligatory. It is the only option to use to be used. The same feature is reported in the grammar of Bajuvi dialect by Karamshoyev, where it is claimed that when Earth replaces a negative marker, it is obligatory. So he has an example like this: Chai loved, Yichayath, right? Who criticized him? No one. And the only option is to use it with Earth. So now for the question diagnostic, the logic of the question diagnostic is that in questions are the downward entailing context, as the formal semanticists say. It is not precisely a negative context, but it's something adjacent to it. And if an item appears there, it is an NPI rather than the NCI. So it is impossible to use ath here, Tarut Yichayath Yavcho, right? The kind of the easiest way to say it would be rather Tarut Yichai Yavcho or Tarut Archaitsa Yavcho, something like this. In conditionals, the indefinite pronouns with ath show some variation. So some speakers kind of claim that it can be used, but generally that's not used. So I indicate this by a question mark here. So if someone met us, it would be very nice, right? And it is weird to use that, but like one person out of, I don't know, 5 which I interviewed claimed it's possible. The ath pronouns may be also licensed by curative negation, but not by sentential negation, but rather by prepositions such as without. So Beyichiyathi Yuchit Mist. So he built a house without anyone. And interestingly enough, they can also be licensed by this participle / infinitival negation no, right? Mashkacht no yida thread. Similarly in Bartanki, I have found similar examples. So our grain remains unthreshed, ungrounded. Right, so we see the noid, the participle noid, ungrounded, and ath may appear here. So it might be licensed not by kind of the negation which appears on the verb, but by a lower type of negation. There is a test for subject position. So the rationale for this test is that the negation sits somewhere in the TP domain. Meanwhile, the subject sits in the spec TP domain. So the neck feature cannot license something which is higher there. Meanwhile, it is not the same with NCIs. So astoty yichizas, yichizat nawicht, right? So yichizat is the subject, grammatical subject of the sentence, but still it can be used with ath. And there is also kind of one of the most confusing tests, which is called being strictly bounded by a clause. What does that mean? It means that for the proper NCIs, for the proper negative concord items, the licensing negation needs to be in the same clause as the NCI item, right? Meanwhile, with the negative polarity items, there is no such a strict restriction here. So as we can see, like if we do not cheat, if we like take two finite clauses and we put the ath indefinite pronoun in the embedded clause, and if we have the negation in the upper clause, in the main clause, that kind of doesn't work. Right? So we expect something like yaborath, but there is no such case. However, in some contexts, the presence of ath is permitted and even obligatory. So if we talk about the clauses licensed by modals, ath is perfectly okay in the embedded clause, even though there is no overt negation here. So you can look at the example 15th. I don't need to eat anything. Mur darkornist yichizat go. Right? So the negation is in the main clause, darkornist. Meanwhile, the ath is in the embedded clause. And like my respondent claimed that we cannot omit ath here. So that is kind of this slight mismatch between it. There are some theories and ways to explain it, but the pattern is kind of more complicated that it can be deduced by the first guess. It can also be licensed by almost, which is qarib. Qarib yichayat nayat. So to sum up, here's the table with a recap of these diagnostics, right? Oh, I forgot to add close boundedness, but it's okay. So in the elliptical answers, it is the indication for NCIs. The absence of use of non-negative context, it is also the indication for NCIs. The use with almost is the argument for NCIs as well. The subject position is also an indication for NCIs, and the close boundedness. If we take the test at face value, yes, it is an indication for it being an NCI. There is another argument for it being an NCI is the focus morphology. So if we look at something other than Romance languages, if we look at Japanese, if we look at Greek, right, there are some particles which kind of remind me of ath. So there are some focus or particles which kind of carry the function of focus particles in non-negative environments, but whenever it appears on indefinite pronouns, it is an NCI here. So there are some specific proposals by Watanabe and Isaac, which specifically associate NC with focus position. So they kind of solve the puzzle of a negative concord by postulating some syntactic things with the focus. An important note that a strong preference for the occurrence of ath in negative context is an emergent feature, right? So I study this mainly by looking at the modern speech. of people who are like 30, 40, 20 years old. And the earlier text and grammars sometimes show the absence of the clitic in prototypical negative context, right? And so if we look at earlier version of Shughni, that was not a strict rule like that. So like we can look at this example found in the work by Lamshoev, Yichai Nayat, right? No one came. So I asked the same context to my speakers, and they say, okay, we can marginally say like that, but it's better to say us. Meanwhile, in older text, I have these examples as well. A related question here. So we have discussed us indefinite pronouns of ye series with us being NCIs. A related question is whether ye pronouns, so the indefinite pronouns of the ye series, without us are NPIs themselves. So the yichayath or yichizath is an NCI, but what about kind of the yichai and yichis? And it seems that they appear in the typical context for NPIs. They appear in what is called downward entailing context, or to use another view, they appear in non-veridical context. So you can see tarot, yichai, yato, right? So they are used in questions more often than architsa, something like this. They are used in the conditionals perfectly. So as you can see in the example 19th. They can be used in imperatives, which are not considered downward entailing operators, but they're considered non-veridical context, something like this. So kuyichiz dak burtham. So yeah, a preliminary conclusion which needs to be backed up with more data is that the pronouns of ye series are negative concord items used in downward entailing context. Meanwhile, with the additions of ath, they are restricted to NCI context, rather to like sentential negation, right? Or to some different varieties of nominal negation, to caritative negation, so on. There is really a short discussion of morphology of ath. The marker under discussion is a clitic. It services further from the root that the affixes ant and ard, but it is lower from than the phrasal clitics. You can see some examples from the work by Polina Padelka. So karamsho yanda hulachit, right? So here the position of two clitics or affix and the clitic is like that. We cannot say karamsho yathand hulachit. And similarly in 22. And the personal clitics surface after that, after us, as has been studied by Darsitikova and others. We can see it here. And these contexts are like with nominal phrases. I will still have to elicit them for indefinite pronouns, something like this. So here, the first puzzle. It is about us and negative concord. I hope I still have time. Yeah, I do. So here is the second puzzle on interaction of negation and modality. And for it, I have this quote by Ledush Habib, Natuya darkor murt, na vustur darkorum. So in Shughni, there are modal verbs and there are particles. Yes, this distinction is really crucial. So the modal verb is vardedo, maybe there's something else. It denotes deontic necessity, right? So I must go to school. There is my obligation, which I imposed by myself. The particles are darkor, boyat, and mumkin. Darkor and boyat are ambiguous between epistemic and deontic necessity. There is a preference here, but like they can be used in both cases. There is a particle mumkin, which kind of fills the gap of epistemic possibility. Here is a table showing the interaction of these particles with negation, right? So we see that mumkin, when we negate mumkin and mumkin nist, when we negate something like when negation is under the scope of mumkin, it's mumkin na and the verb. When there is a necessity model, it is darkor plus infinitive. When we negate the necessity model, it's darkor nist plus infinitive, right? And whenever there is a negation embedded under the model, it is something like boyat ma plus subjunctive. Alternatively, maybe like no darkor ma. I have not seen it. And so here is for the deontic part of modality. It's a work under discussion, so like I'm not sure about some parts of the table, but here it is. So the important thing is that the particles mumkin and darkor show nominal and adjectival properties. So for that reason, they are negated by the copular negation nist. So like see English, it is not possible, it is not needed, or Russian, не нужно, or не можно. Нет, можно is not the right thing. On the contrary, the particle boyat cannot combine neither with the copular negation nist nor with verbal negation na. Therefore, when the not necessary interpretation is needed, the contraction darkor nist is used, right? So we cannot easily combine boyat with negation. So like with negation which outscopes boyat. So like when we want to say something like na boyat, we say murt уже тармактап сито даркор nest, right? So instead of like it works the same for both deontic necessity and epistemic necessity. It's like that. So the Tajik version na boyat cannot be used here. So like I've listed something like this. Wus na boyat pekuyen sam. No, it's not used. Similarly, boyat nist is also not used. So like it can be argued that boyat is a kind of positive polarity item here, but I don't make that claim. Also, the necessity models and possibility models differ in the selection of negative elements when the module outscopes the negation. So, as a general rule, the possibility models require either no or na. Meanwhile, the necessity models require ma. That is kind of the rule here. So, as you can see, fuxos vardi no yato, right? The verb of vardi do selects for the no yato in the embedded clause. Meanwhile, kind of if we turn into epistemic possibility with mumkin, there is just the na, the usual negative element. Meanwhile, if we look at necessity models, like for example, boyat, right? As boyat tarmaktab masa. And instead of na or no, we get the ma. I don't know, this thing which is vaguely called irrealis negation. But I will not dive deeper into na and ma because it has been studied by Parker and others. Okay, so like, and I want to stress that this interaction between boyat and ma is equally valid for the deontic modality. I mustn't go to school. I just should not do it because it's my conviction. And epistemic modality, it mustn't be very hard. Jan boyat ma don't clean. So here is the table which like briefly summarizes what I've said, right? So like here is the modality type of each of these models, let's say it like that. They show different syntactic category, like mumkin and darkor are these adjectival / nominal things. Boyat is like something mysterious, it's a particle. Vardido is a verb, and there are different like negative morphemes which these models take when the negation outscopes them, so nist, nist, and na, and also they select for different negation markers when the negation markers are in the scope of modality. So you get mumkin na, darkor ma, boyat ma, and vardium no, something like this. So that's it for the modality of negation. And let's also discuss the last puzzle here, which is the nominal negation. And I can also illustrate it by Ludur Habib. You mumash bashantluft, you nodarkor. I mardum, voi mardum. So this negation is section is dedicated to the use of nominal negator no. First, kind of as it's evident from this, the first example, it appears on adjectives, giving way to adjectival low negation, right? Something like English, an, or non, something like this. So, jid no darkor, sos lufdert nist. He's intelligent, singing songs is not for him. So the example from grammar by Karamshoev, Baju example letter checked with my respondents. It can be stacked with the sentential negation, giving rise to double negation constructions, something like Yid chorik murt nabalat nist. Yes, that man is not unknown to me. Right. So it just behaves like normal low negation. But these contexts are quite limited. So like search in the dictionary by Karamshoev and later like elicitation found that it is really as a closed class of words which can take this, and very frequently they are Tajik loan words. They appear almost exclusively with sometimes Tajik loan words, and it may be argued that they were borrowed as a single lexical unit. But the main context under discussion is therefore no with infinitives and participles, right? So apart from adjectives, no may also appear with infinitives and participles, something like this. Dido, dim kitop no fate. His wish is not to read that book, right? So you clearly see here a participle, a short form of the participle, and we see no attention to it. And there's an interesting peculiar feature of this negative particle, which is described again by Dr. Karamshoev. The participial form under negation by particle no undergoes a change. More specifically, the suffix in is deleted, right? And in some cases, the perfect flexion is deleted as well. In the last case, the form is identical to the short infinitive form. Note that this identity does not mean like this phonological identity does not mean that it is used the same as the short infinitive. I believe that the contexts are a bit different here. So Karamshoev lists the following examples. In the affirmative case, we have something like nevishchen daftar, which means like scribbled notebook. And in the negative case, we can say no nevisht daftar or no nevish daftar or no nevishchen daftar. It's like that. Similarly, verichten dek from the verb verishto to break. Meanwhile, in the negative, we can say no verisht dek. Note that in the affirmative, we cannot say something like verisht dek or verisht dek. We need like overt participial morphology in order to use it either in this context or in the predicative construction. So yes, I illustrated with the verb shaito to read, possible forms no shade, no shade, and no shade. In the affirmative, only the third option is available in this context. The author notes that the abridged participial forms and infinitival forms are mainly used in the predicative context. Meanwhile, the full participial form is used in attributive context, but in the attributive context, there is a whole zoo of the forms which can be used. So, for example, in attributive context, the abridged participial form can be used as well. We can say something like no winch odamirt chistolöve, again from Karamshoev. And it means, what would you say to a person who saw nothing, right? And know that it is not no winchen odamirt, right, as the morphology kind of would force us to do, but it's rather no winch odam. I have tried to keep this my talk really descriptive and not to propose any theories or deep explanations for that, but it seems to me that here kind of the no spells out, as we can say, a part of the adjectival material here. So no is partly responsible for some adjectival work here. And sometimes the overt morphology of adjectives may be taken over by no. And kind of the preliminary result of my investigation, checked on like 2 speakers, I will still have to consult other ones, is that the breached participle forms are no longer used, right? So the following example constructed by me was like considered quite bad. So вам нашить киток мурдак, right? Give me that unread book. I guess it would be good in the times of Karamshoev, but now like people are reluctant to use it, as you can see here. So the perfect form, excuse me for this calembour, but play of words, but the nicest form here would be to use вам нашейчин киток мурдак, right? Not with нашейт, but нашейчин. Another feature of no is reported in Rajabbekov 2015. So in dissertation by Rajabbekov, Mahbub Rajabbekov, apparently negative infinitives with no, so like we are going to discuss negative infinitives as well, they cannot combine with aspectual positions like tar, as, pe, and something like this. So mashta but as the meth huzamin dar chertkina. In 2 days we will start blowing our earth. We cannot negate it here, like it's incompatible with lower negation, like that. Still, a peculiar feature of no infinitives is that they can combine with the prospective at position che. So Jamshed tarsur che nosit, right? Again, an example from Rajabbekov. Jamshed was going to not go to the marriage, right? So the che, the prospective morpheme, does not block this negation from appearing here. And note that it linearly appears before that, right? So it is really embedded here. And as you can see from the translation, he was not, so like, it's not that Jamshed was not going to go to the marriage. Sorry for that. Jamshed was going to not go to the marriage, and I could have indicated it by the square brackets to see the difference. And we have a beautiful semantic contrast between the use of no and the use of nist. The use of nist is basically, nist is a negative copula. It is a fusion of negation and the silent copular verb in the present tense in Shughni. So if we compare it with example 41, we get Jamshed was not going to go to the marriage. Jamshed tarsur cheset nist, right? So he had no intention of going to the marriage. And Rajabbekov treats these examples of synonymic. He still knows the difference between them. No apparently signifies the absence of the action expressed by the infinitive, right? There was no action present. Meanwhile, nist negates the intention of the subject to do the action expressed by the infinitive. And this contrast is like perfect for postulating the, I don't know, some syntactic rules for that, for example, nist is located somewhere high in the TP structure. Meanwhile, no is really quite adjacent to the verb. It is either in the VP, like lower to the aspect, if we compare, like consider no an aspectual marker, but let's not like dive deep into the syntactic analysis here. And it's nice that the low nominal negation, as I have already discussed, can apparently stack with higher negation, yielding double negation readings. So, vuzum noluvdo wamart navardot. I could not tell her, right? So it's again an indication for them being in different parts of the clausal spine. And similarly, you have no right to not let me there. So like no combines with how do I say it? Both with nist and with verbal proper negation. Na tunt ak nist mut taret no lakchido. So it's like that. So it is very preliminary now. I have outlined some of the puzzles. I hope that they were interesting for you. A brief conclusion. Add is considered to be a negative concord item, also being a focus marker. The exact kind of relation of the focus is to be studied. Shughni model select for different negative markers. there's really a variety of or syntactic structures which may appear with negative verbs and particles here. And also there is an interesting context of blocking negation with boyat. Boyat does not like to be in the scope of negation, so people use darkor with nist. And also the nominal negation no is added to the participles with some morphological changes, which may not be present in present speech. And also it is added to the infinitives, which gives rise to also interesting semantic and syntactic factors. So thank you for your attention. I'm ready to answer the questions.